Assalamu alaikum and welcome back once again to Today in African History with Baba Shaka. I'm Baba Shaka and today is February 10th, 2021. Now, before we get started, I am sure that some of you have noticed that we have been absent for a couple of days. The thing is, we've been having some technical difficulties with one of the apps that we use. In addition to that, I had to undergo some dental surgery. Now, we haven't quite fixed the technical problem with the app in question, but I must say that I am feeling much better. So, let's continue. On this day, February 10th, 1992, the writer and storyteller Alex Haley joined the ancestors. Alexander Murray Palmer Haley, the oldest of three sons, his brothers George and Julius, was born to Simon and Bertha Palmer Haley on August 11, 1921, in Ithaca, New York. 6 weeks after his birth, Simon and Bertha returned to Henning, Tennessee to present Will and Cynthia Palmer with their grandson, Alex Haley. Alex and his mother remained with the Palmers while Simon returned to Cornell University to complete his graduate studies in agriculture. After the death of Will Palmer in 1926, Simon Haley joined his wife and family in Henning and operated the Palmer business. During this time, Haley listened to his grandmother Cynthia tell vibrant stories about their family's ancestry. She spoke about Kinte, right? One of his grandfathers tracing back 7 generations, whom she said was sold into slavery with other Gambian Africans in Annapolis. That was Annapolis, Maryland. In 1929, Simon Haley began his teaching career and the family moved. 2 years after they relocated, Bertha Haley passed away in Normal, Alabama, when Alex was just 10 years old. Although Alex was considered a lax student, he graduated from high school at the age of 15 in 1937. Haley was enrolled in Elizabeth City State Teachers College in North Carolina, which he attended for 2 years. But at the age of 17, Alex returned home to inform his father of his withdrawal from college. Simon Haley felt that Alex needed discipline and growth and convinced his son to enlist in the military when he turned 18. On May 24, 1939, Alex Haley began his 20-year service with the U.S. Coast Guard as a mess boy. He then became a third-class petty officer in the rate of mess attendant, one of the few enlisted designations open to African Americans at that time. It was during his service in the Pacific Theater of Operations that Haley taught himself the craft of writing stories. He talked of how the greatest enemy he and his crew faced during their long sea voyages wasn't the Japanese, but boredom. To alleviate his boredom, he wrote love letters on behalf of his shipmates to send to their wives and girlfriends. Haley then began writing short stories while working at sea, but it took 8 long years before small magazines began accepting some of his stories. Haley's stay in the Coast Guard was lengthened by the start of World War II. He received a promotion to steward and married Nanny Branch in 1941, whom he had met at a North Carolina port. Soon after Pearl Harbor, he was assigned to a cargo supply ship in the South Pacific. Shortly after this, he was promoted from steward to signalman, and from the signal bridge, he looked down upon a mail call scene that led to a story by the same name that was first printed in the ship's newsletter, and after several shipmates sent it back to the States in letters, it was picked up by a wire service and was widely reprinted. After this, in 1945, Haley was ordered back to the States and assigned to the 3rd District, which is in New York, and he was assigned to the Public Relations Department. He continued, quote-unquote, learning to write while in this position and achieved some bylines in tolerant military publications. The year 1950 was momentous for Haley for 2 reasons. First, the admiral he served as steward was so impressed by one of Haley's articles that he successfully petitioned the Coast Guard to create the rating of journalists for Haley, where he was named their chief journalist, a position created just for him. Secondly, the same year brought his first commercial sale, a story about laughable requests for help that the Coast Guard received called They Drive You Crazy and carried by This Week magazine. The years that followed saw a steady increase in interest in his articles. Cornet bought the first of 15 to 20 short human interest articles in 1952. In 1953, Yachting, Flying, and Reader's Digest added their readership to his fans. In 1955, one of his articles, Hope Springs Eternal, appeared in the January issue of Atlantic Monthly. While it focused on his great aunt Liz, the article mentioned his grandmother's having, quote, a paper tracing her family back to a freed slave, unquote, a hint of the phenomenal family saga Haley would interpret a decade later in Roots. In 1956, he turned his eye toward writing articles of interest to blacks with the article A New Audience for Radio, on radio stations formatted for black listeners that appeared within the February issue of Harper's Magazine. In 1954, he was transferred from New York to San Francisco, still writing constantly but being published sporadically. He finally retired in 1959 at the young age of 37 with 20 years of service. He, his wife, and their two teenage children immediately returned to New York for him to pursue full-time freelance writing. After World War II, Haley was able to petition the Coast Guard to allow him to transfer into the field of journalism, and by 1949 he had become a first-class petty officer in the rate of journalist, and he was later advanced to the rank of chief petty officer and held this grade until his retirement. Haley's awards and decorations from the U.S. Coast Guard include the American Defense Service Medal with a C clasp, the American Campaign Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, the Coast Guard Good Conduct Medal with 1 silver and 1 bronze service star, the Korean Service Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, the United Nations Service Medal, and the Coast Guard Expert Marksmanship Medal. You don't want to mess with him. In 1999, the United States Coast Guard honored Haley by naming a cutter the USS Alex Haley after him. Haley was also posthumously awarded the Korean War Service Medal 10 years after his death. You see, this award was created in 1999 and did not exist during Haley's lifetime. After retiring from the U.S. Coast Guard in 1959, after 20 years of military service, Alex Haley continued as a journalist, first as a writer and senior editor at Reader's Digest, a monthly general interest family magazine. He also established the Playboy interview feature, where he conversed with jazz legend Miles Davis, which appeared in the September 1962 issue. In the interview, Davis candidly spoke about his thoughts and feelings on racism, and it was this interview that set the tone for what would become a significant part of the magazine. Haley then began interviewing cultural icons, including Martin Luther King Jr. This 1965 magazine interview with Haley was the longest interview Martin Luther King Jr. had ever granted to any publication. Throughout the 1960s, other notable Playboy interviews by Alex Haley include American Nazi Party leader George Lincoln Rockwell. Rockwell agreed to meet with Haley only after Haley, in a phone conversation, assured him that he was not Jewish. Haley exhibited remarkable calm and professionalism despite the handgun Rockwell kept on the table throughout the interview. Haley also interviewed Cassius Clay, who spoke about changing his name to Muhammad Ali. Other interviews included Jack Ruby's defense attorney Melvin Belly, Sammy Davis Jr., Jim Brown, Johnny Carson, and Quincy Jones. One of Haley's most famous interviews was with Malcolm X in 1963 for Playboy, which led to their collaboration on the activist's autobiography. The autobiography of Malcolm X, based on interviews conducted shortly before Malcolm's death or Malcolm's assassination, and with an epilogue. Published in 1965, the book became a huge success and was later named by Time magazine as one of the 10 most important non-fiction books of the 20th century. The book was translated into 8 languages and sold over 8 million copies. Haley later completed a memoir of Malcolm X for Playboy 6 months before his death in February of 1992. The memoir was published in the July 1992 issue of the magazine. Roots. Pursuing a few slender clues of oral family history told to him by maternal grandmother in Henning, Tennessee, Haley spent the next 12 years traveling 3 continents, tracking his maternal family back to a Mandinka youth named Kunta Kinte, who was kidnapped into slavery from a small village of Joffre in the Gambia, West Africa. Haley said the most emotional moment of his life was on September 29, 1967, when he stood at the site in Annapolis, Maryland, where his ancestor had arrived 200 years before. During this period, Haley became a prolific lecturer at various universities in the United States and in Great Britain, and received many honorary Doctor of Letters degrees for his work. Haley then continued to write magazine articles, sharing what he learned about his family's history in relation to slavery. The book Roots, the Saga of an American Family, excerpted in Reader's Digest in 1974 and heralded for several years, was finally published in the fall of 1976 with very wide publicity and reviews. With cover stories, book reviews, and interviews with Haley in scores of magazines and newspaper articles, the book became the #1 national bestseller, sold in the millions, and was published as a paperback in 1977. Roots became a phenomenon. It was serialized in the New York Post and the Long Island Press. Instructional packages, lesson plans based on Roots, and other books about Roots for schools were published along with records and tapes by Haley. Roots was eventually published in 37 languages. Haley received the NAACP Spingarn Medal in 1977. 4,000 deans and department heads of colleges and universities throughout the country, in a survey conducted by Scholastic magazine, selected Haley as America's foremost achiever in the literature category. By the way, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was selected in the religious category. Later, Haley also won a special award for Roots in 1997 from the Pulitzer Board, also known or commonly known as the Pulitzer Prize. The publication of Roots, along with 2 enormously popular television versions of it, Roots in 1977 and Roots the Next Generation in 1979, made Haley an international celebrity and lecturer. An estimated 80 to 130 million viewers watched the last episode of Roots, generating greater interest in the novel and prompting thousands of Americans to investigate their own family genealogies. Roots emphasized that African Americans have a long history, that not all of that history is lost, as many believed. The novel and television series also provoked a national discussion about the history and legacy of racism and slavery. In 1988, Haley conducted a promotional tour for a novella titled A Different Kind of Christmas about slave escapes in the 1850s. He also promoted a drama, Roots the Gift, a 2-hour television program shown in December 1988. This story revolved around 2 principal characters from Roots, Kunta Kinte and Fiddler, who are involved in a slave break for freedom on Christmas Eve. Haley then began working on his second historical novel based on another branch of his family, traced through his grandmother, Queen, the daughter of a black slave woman and her white slave master. He was unable to finish writing Queen, the story of an American family, before he died, and at his request, it was completed by David Stevens. Haley left behind many boxes of research notes and a 700-page outline of the story, but David says he was mainly guided by the many long conversations he had with Alex. After it was finished by David Stevens and published as Alex Haley's Queen in 1993, It was subsequently made into a movie starring Halle Berry in the title role, aired on CBS as a miniseries on February 14, 1993. On February 10th, 1992, Alex Haley died of a heart attack in Seattle. He was scheduled to speak that day at the Bangor Naval Submarine Base in Bremerton, Washington, just 15 miles from Seattle. After a funeral service in Memphis, he was buried in the front yard of his grandparents' home in Henning. Following his death, his farm in Clinton, Tennessee was sold to Marion Wright Edelman's Children's Defense Fund and still exists as a training and retreat center for youth workers. His legacy continues. The story he shared was just as relevant today as the words he left behind. Quote, "We all suffer. If a man's wise, he'll learn from it." At the time of his death, Mr. Haley was general editor of 28 books of the Stories of American series. The education of children was a cause to which he was firmly and enthusiastically committed. The series represents part of Alex Haley's legacy to the children of America. Alex Haley, in his introduction to the series, ended with, quote, "So read Stories of America and listen to the music of your history and witness the sights, sounds, smells, and life of your past," unquote. It was on this date, February 10th, 1992, that Alex Haley joined the ancestors. I would like to give a special shout out to President Baba Mosi and the sisters and brothers of the Woodson Banneker Jackson Bay Division number 330 UNIA ACL Rehabilitating Committee. This is the Universal Negro Improvement Association, originally founded by the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and the African League committees. These folks are helping to promote these daily lessons on their Facebook pages because our goals are the same, and that is to enlighten African people to their glorious history. Those of you who have subscribed, I thank you wholeheartedly for your support. For those of you who have not yet subscribed, I enthusiastically encourage you to do so. Just hit that subscribe button, go like that, bang, and just hit it like that, and you're in. You're a part of the family, right? So I want to welcome you beforehand to become part of the family. And please like, share, make comments, and please definitely share it with the young amongst us. So until tomorrow, inshallah, this is Today in African History with Baba Shaka. Masalam.